Hey, welcome to the Learning and Design Masterminds podcast that bridges the world of instructional design and project management. I am Sherry Conklin, your host, and with me we have Daisy Pajeto, your co-host. And I'm thrilled to be your guide as we explore these exciting intersections of these two dynamic fields. So in this episode, we will explore the latest trends and case studies and practical tips from Chris that can help you deliver exceptional learning experiences while keeping your projects on time. So Chris is a former MIT alum, and he's currently employed at UNC Charlotte as an instructional designer. So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. And so if you could share your background and experiences of working on a project with others or individually, and just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be part of a great team where even across our team, we have different focuses and areas, but we end up getting put on each other's projects because we're interested, because we care about it. So there's a lot of different things where we've cross collaborated on projects, and especially when you're working with other inspirational and innovative individuals, some challenges and some things to use to really get to a successful place with that. One of those areas has been AI, just because it's popped up. It's hit everybody in higher ed pretty, and honestly, outside of higher ed as well. It's been the growing piece, and like anybody else, we were thrust into that a little bit. I'm not an early adopter by any means, although some would probably say at this point we are. I ended up starting to use it because somebody backed out of a presentation and they put me in instead, rather than canceling it. And so I kind of forced learned and I ended up using it on a couple of things and got into the pedagogy of it. But from that stemmed some conversations with some colleagues who on our faculty development side were working on how to help faculty cope with these and bring some knowledge and pieces to them. And because of the work that I had done in establishing some of the pedagogy elements and what we were doing on our course production side, they pulled me in on their institute that they were running. And this institute was to help faculty within our college and faculty from other colleges to come and be able to learn, about AI, about how to use it. We had a bunch of different lightning talks and sessions to help people with that. And working with the other team, since it wasn't my team, I was the only one from our team, had its own kind of challenges and I'd say a dance and flow with each other. And one of the areas of keeping things on time and communicating across multiple teams is always a challenge because there's internal conversations that are happening, and then you're getting pulled in later. One of the things that I found extremely important was to check egos at the door. Everybody on the team wants the same thing. So being goal focused on what are we providing? It's not about who's providing it specifically. It's not about putting names on things. It's more about how can we get that best end product, and also realize that me as the outsider coming in on the team, it's not my job to reroute what they're doing. It's my job to provide my best guidance and then let them decide the route that they want to go with components of it. In the end, for us, having these timelines and communicating who's working on what component and then checking in and being willing to pivot when changes are made, depending on leadership and who's kind of in control of the different elements, that was pretty frequent. And most of us in education are pretty adaptable anyways. So using previous skills as an educator and having to deal with the rapid changes and being willing to, rethink something that you thought you had planned out pretty well to fit a new need and to fit another group's ideals.
So, and I think the AI is interesting in the sense that, you might get pulled in on a project. Did you find like the scope kept expanding? Because I mean, you could go from how to use it to how to use it ethically to, plagiarism. I mean, so is it just a rolling scope, or are you going to have a chance to be released from the project at some point?
I actually just talked to some of their members about that today because that spawned other things, other trainings that they would pull me into that we do a couple times a cohort. And so I've let them know that moving forward, one, AI is changing enough that that'll probably have to be revamped, but two, I can't be on it for the life of the project. The scope definitely changes, especially with something that is brand new, like AI was, and that is evolving people's understanding of it. You cover a small section at first, and well, we also need to cover this, and we're hearing conversations about this, and so it keeps growing. There's a lot as well with the team that I was helping. They're new, and so being able to have open conversations with their leadership is saying, hey, we got to let your team who's new kind of work through these processes and get to that point, coming from a team that is also new but a little bit more established. And so being able to learn from what we went through and from our team and share some of those things, be a little bit more reflective. But in the end, I know that the changes are all good natured in terms of we want to add more to that scope. And we want to do the bigger, better thing. And that's each of us having different personalities and way of attacking things is something that if you're cognitive of, that's really helpful. We've done some tilt analysis, which is a program on a little bit of how each person kind of tilts into certain areas mentally of how they handle stress and how they handle communication. And so using a little bit of that, but also just personality types of realizing, what their goal is and how they communicate and being willing to adapt ourselves to match that. It doesn't mean that we're losing our own identity around how we want to communicate, but it's being part of a team and realizing that I don't have to communicate my one way. I can adapt to theirs. And then that actually helps me build trust, build regency, and allows me to then have a better standing with how I present information and ultimately get kind of what my goals and my push is for. It's usually more successful when I look at it that way.
So it's interesting that you are being pulled in to another team. How would you describe, and even if among your team, or the differences in communicating when collaborating on a project? Can you speak to the communication patterns and what's worked well and what maybe hasn't?
Yeah, we've got on our team, we've got three main leaders, or in our Center for Teaching and Learning, we've got three main leaders, and each of them has a different communication style. This is something that when I'm having brain pitch sessions with them, or we're talking about things, I have to be cognitive of how I'm pitching, how I'm, communicating, how much I'm pushing on certain elements, and where kind of those interests lie. I know that never is anything bad natured because we're all pushing for better education and for better things. But we come at it from different perspectives. And so my goal is always to fully think out everyone else's perspective. There's a story about a farmer who built a fence and the other person wanted it removed without thinking about why. So usually when somebody wants a change or wants something, they have a reason why they're, pushing for that. And so for me, my goal is usually to try and pick apart and think, why do they want this? Why are they holding strongly to this? Where are they coming from? And then if I can present, if I still feel like the way that I'm, the idea that I'm pushing for is valid based on what their context is, then I'll reframe it in the way that they're thinking so that it goes with it and captures the essence of what they want, but lets them know the pitfalls or the obstacles that I see as well. And then it's also knowing that, I don't have to have my idea chosen. I don't have to have my initiative pushed. There's a time and place. I've had quite a few discussions, especially when I was new, of where I saw something and I thought that maybe this is the direction where we should try this. And sometimes it's a no because of past experience. And so then that doesn't mean I'm not going to push for it anymore. It means I'm going to take a look at, okay, how did you do it last time? What's new that we can bring to the table to make it successful this time? So using that historical knowledge, that legacy knowledge from people who've been there longer, especially if you're joining a new team, especially if your team is new, you're all kind of trying to find where you fit and trying to find your own spot. And so that communication is really key, because without it, people assume what they think you're thinking. And so we've done a great job on our team of creating a very open conversation around it. People know that they can go to each other for help. And, we generally care about how each other is doing, how they're doing in their field, but also just personally and what's going on with them.
How do the changes come down the pipeline? Is there a form, or is it more like leadership says, I want this change, and then
little bit of a mix. Higher education, as many things, has a lot of politics. I am in the last year getting to see more of the back end of some of those as I help with process design for our group. And before that, you're getting told, things, and you don't always have that context of what's happening at a higher level. And it's, well, why can't we change it? It seems easy. It's usually not that case. And so trying to figure out, we have monthly meetings, we have, depending on what the communication is, what the change is or initiative, some of that's passed down by the team leaders, by our directors, our associate directors. And then some of it is just it hits you the next day. It's, this has happened rapidly and here's the change. And sometimes it could have been avoided, sometimes it couldn't. And again, I think that it's good to know that leaders are people too, and they're not going to 100% of the time do it the right way. And that's okay. I mean, that's how we learn what we want to be as leaders, and how we want to communicate to people if we ever in those positions to do so. So a lot of that is also, I know when I see something that I don't think is handled right, I feel like I'm paid to present my best opinion on process and on how to do things. And as an instructional designer, we see problems everywhere and we want to fix all of them. So, I'm not scared to communicate appropriately, tactfully, and respectfully. I think that, maybe we should look at it this way, or we should have done it a different way. And now we need to think of this. It's not you're wrong. It's because of how this has happened, let's take a look at what we need to do to make sure that it's successful from here out, regardless of how it happened. So being more proactive than reactive, because there's always going to be things that communication wise fall apart. It just happens when you're an organization.
Yeah. And you made me think of something with the fact that you're working with another team, and then you said, we find out the next day changes happen rapidly. How do you feel like you manage your your own projects? So you may be collaborating with one team, then you have your own projects that you're working on, you have your day-to-day tasks, and maybe you're pulled with another team. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle. Especially right now, it's very fitting for this question. My manager went on FMLA for some personal reasons, so wearing a lot of hats right now. And my regular job of building courses and working with faculty for that is a little bit pushed to the side, because I'm also in charge of our media team and combining two previous media teams right now with that side of the process of how to make that work. So that's kind of my focus, and then helping our ID team, and then my responsibility of course building. The good thing is, in the 2 years I've been doing this with UNC Charlotte, I've been very reflective of how I build and of how I manage my time. That's something that early on, for about a month, I had a lot of time, and then after that, I haven't had time since. So I've had to think about how to be more efficient with my current role, and rather than just being okay with how I've done things previously, to think about, how can I build things accessible from the beginning instead of doing accessibility at the end? How can I communicate with my faculty to get that buy-in to the learning process earlier so that I can build? And actually being pulled into AI has helped with that a little bit too, because I'm able to use that as a brainstorming partner, and I'm able to do more for the faculty to bring it to them so that I'm not waiting as much, and let them then be the experts. Because for professors, for teachers, we critique very well. We may not always create very well, but we're very good at saying that that's not right and it should be this. So playing off of that, I'm able to bring them entire course outlines, bring them suggested objectives, assignments based off of what they have previously, or if it's a new course based off of what their goals are. And then they're able to let me know, that's not right, let's add this, let's change this, that's a good idea, I like this piece, but can we add this because it would benefit the students this way? So I found that I can do my role a bit more effectively because I'm more open to branching out and to change, and just knowing that I can't stay the same through it. And it motivate what I do outside of my regular builds motivates me. It's what makes it worthwhile. I'm good at building Canvas. It's fine. It's not the most fun part of doing the higher ed, but I also know I'm making a difference through it. And I get to see that more when I do these other projects and help these other teams, because that payoff is right there.
So I feel as though I can say this because I was an instructional designer at one point, but faculty can be very difficult to work with sometimes, some faculty, not Dr. Baheter, but and also with leadership changes. So can you describe any situations or experiences where you've had to have difficult conversations with team members, with stakeholders, faculty, leadership?
Yeah.
And
All
how
of the
do you
above.
approach that? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll start with faculty. Based on my previous role as a K-12 teacher, based on working with parents and working with students, my background in how I work with people is always, you don't do things randomly. People have a reason, even kids do. And so it's trying to find out what angle are they looking at it from, what is their interest and their goal. And unfortunately, it's not always student success. And so sometimes the card that I have to play is figuring out, where is their line at? What do they care about? Is it reduced grading? Is it, they don't want to do this one particular component of course building? And I find that when I treat it that way and I present myself as the expert, but not in a, I am better than you, this is a collaborative. I think that there's a lot of, in higher ed, I've got a PhD, you don't. And so I have to establish that background of where my knowledge is coming from. And I do that through understanding, through my explanation of components. And I spend a lot of time at the beginning of our process of relationship building, asking them questions that they may not be expecting about themselves, about their feelings on certain things, about transitions. And I try to keep all my questions neutral, so I'm not leading. And I'm really analyzing them as much as I'm analyzing their course. And then through that, I can get to, what are the student needs? How is this coming across? I can use the data that I can find on those pieces. But a lot of it is I'm building up an educator as I go through this process. That's the second side of our course building, is we're going to leave them with better pedagogy, with new ideas, with ways to impact their colleagues. And so that's the larger impact. And so I treat it with, let me find out where they're coming from, where have they been burned before that's affecting why they're, focused on this. Why do they want to have, these really big quizzes and tests and things? Well, it's because something's happened and has soured their view of, what this element is. And so however I can work with that for faculty, I've had really nobody that at the end of it I wasn't friends with, and on a professional level. And even more so, there's people who past faculty who will text me because they worked with me for over a year on multiple courses and different things, and then they don't see me every week, so now they just check in. And that's another side of reward that I wasn't expecting from my role. When it comes to team members and with what I'm doing with media right now, that can get a little bit challenging, because my role is not in charge of media per se. I'm in charge of media process and helping to bring these two teams together. And so when I'm having difficult conversations about standards of quality or about work that's been done, I always attach the growth mindset to it of, our goal is not for you to be the best. It's not for me to tell you what is best. It's for us to create whatever's best for students. And so that's the goalposts that we're going for. And so any comments, critiques, things I give you isn't an admonishment. It's this is what we need to do to make sure that we're at the top of our game, so that students are getting something effective, so that we don't get this back in a year either with changes needed. And so working together as a team to find out, where do you want to grow? That was a big part of the media teams coming together, is I wanted to see, where do you want to be? I can tell you what your job role says. I can, give you just that work. But if you're interested in other things, I'm going to try to find a way to let you grow into those spaces. And if you want training to do something a little bit better, or you want to shadow, providing those opportunities so that you feel like I'm investing, and so that you feel like our team is investing in you and your future, whether that stays with us or eventually leads to you, finding your niche and going someplace else. Because in the end, we want to affect the industry too. It's not just our school and our programs. And then leadership. with leadership, so I'll track of where I was going. Communicating those challenging conversations is kind of a touch and go. It depends on the personality. What it took for me and the reason why I'm in the space that I am to be able to communicate the way I do is because I built an idea around the fact that I'm going to be there. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to push my hardest. I'm going to do what's right. That's where I go, is if I'm doing what's right for students, doing what's right for faculty, then I can't be wrong. I can fail, but it doesn't mean that I'm wrong in my effort and pursuit of that. And so building that idea around how I carry myself and that my goals are for the betterment, I think that builds a trust. And so even when I disagree with upper management, with leadership, or I bring ideas that they haven't vetted yet, I'm usually met with acceptance of it, with let me think about this. And it's created, I think, a healthier communication across all of us, not because of me, but just because it opens up those lines of communication, and it lets everybody kind of grow towards that same goal of innovating and pushing our entire team forward.
And you've mentioned this a couple times, relationship and trust. So do you feel this is like a key for working in a team? And have you seen where people maybe don't build relationships? It sounds like you really focus on building relationships, and that might be something it's important for people going into the field to do.
Yeah, I think it's important for almost every field. Almost everything's customer service, whether you realize it or not. Almost everything is relationship building. My success as a K-12 teacher was because of relationships. It wasn't because I was good at presenting material. That was secondary. Once I had the relationship, that led to everything else. That led to affecting behavior. That led to affecting how students responded to me presenting content, because there was a trust there. I have your best interest in mind. And then that carries over then to working in higher ed, working with faculty, working with a lot of different clients and stakeholders, because I'm working with program managers, sometimes department chairs, sometimes faculty, sometimes other colleges. And every single time someone comes in to tell you how to do things, you're going to meet them with skepticism. So there's a level of trust, of getting buy-in from people through the fact that you're there for them and it's not self-serving. It's tends to be in higher ed that a lot of people do put out these are the awards I won, these are the things I'm doing, and that's good because you want to promote things, but that can't be the only reason. You have to be pushing everybody else forward and helping them. And so having that ability to work on the relationship, I've seen it go awry as well within our department. People who have left because they didn't feel like they fit in. And a lot of it, as an outsider watching, was because of communication and because of mixed storylines and people not communicating effectively what they're saying in one situation to another. And that's something hard to address because it takes a lot of reflection from the people involved. It's one of those things that's hard to tell you. You're spinning it differently this way than you were previously. And a lot of that's because it's subconscious. Have a certain feeling about that person. And so you have to remove some of those barriers sometimes and realize that you're going to hurt the team by not thinking about that. And in the end, we want people to succeed wherever they are. So trying to communicate, for me, I was trying to work as a go-between. This person was working, it was one of our distance workers. So they didn't come into the office. They were 100% remote. And it was hard for them to see the changes that were happening because they were there. So they're asking for things, they're asking for changes. And because I'm in the office on the ground, I can hear those things, those conversations happening. I can see that those wheels are moving, but it's not as fast as maybe some people want. And because they can't see it, they think nothing's happening. And so for me to try and support my other coworkers and team members is trying to communicate, make them feel a part of it, letting them know, hey, if I can't tell you specifics, I can tell you something's happening. Like things are going, those conversations are happening. As I'm allowed to, I'll let you know more, but also the transparency. In most cases, unless I'm told not to tell something, I'm going to share it in a very clear communication around matter of fact, not with opinion. And I think that's tough because it's easy to want to spin stories to have the fun conversations and things like that, but that ends up causing more issues on the back end. And I think we've got pretty transparent communication most of the time within our group. And so that's helped model that, but also people don't always realize they've told one person, not the other. So there's a lot of just being careful about that communication, because that's what builds the trust. If you're telling one person, you forget to tell the other person, they're going to read that a different way, even if it's not intentional. So thinking about your lines of communication, and that's from the bottom up or the top down. Of if I'm working on something, I think something's wrong, there's nothing wrong with communicating that, letting them know that you're still working on that piece, rather than them finding out when something ends up happening. So even if you're not in a role where you're passing the information along from the top down, being able to think about how you want to communicate and communicate with your peers so they feel included and pulled in.
So I'm hearing like transparency, take the emotion and opinion out, and just be matter of fact and base it on research per se, or something more concrete, not abstract.
Yeah, and then there's time and place for opinion. It depends on the type of conversation, but if it's a telephone game of passing information along, it's probably not the time. So we've all played that game. We know it doesn't come out with the same message in the end or the same intent, and that's where you kind of get a festering within groups of, something's not right, and it's because people aren't hearing it the way that it's intended. And that's something that when I present anything, I usually write basically an RFP, a request for proposal, where I line out every single thing, and then I give them the executive summary and let them know I have this here for you if you want the full component. And that way, if it ever comes back, it's like, here's the full idea around it. That way it's not misconstrued as it's trying to do or be something that it's not, because it's been passed by word of mouth. So having that down, and that's just the way that I operate, because I also want to fully plan things out before I push them forward within a reasonable time at least. And I find that it helps when there are miscommunications to see, okay, this is what it started as. I can see what your intent was.
Well, thank you so much. I know we're getting close to our end, so I want to thank you so much for being part of the MIT podcast and sharing your experiences.
I appreciate you guys inviting me. Enjoyed my time at UNC Wilmington and being part of the MIT program, and it taught me a lot. I use a lot of the components I learned both from being a student in a fully distance program, as well as from what I learned from my professors. I use it constantly, and it puts me in a good spot.